are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Oh, how we love you. You are the one our hearts adore. Well, this time, we can all be seated. Thank you so much. We're going to take just a second, and we're going to talk about offering. And so, we kind of view offering just again as another act of worship. So, if you're a visitor online, if you're a visitor here, that's not something we expect or ask of you. Only if God is telling you on your heart to give, that's fine. Or otherwise, we just we look expectantly into what God's going to do in the kingdom through the gifts and the offerings that come to this house, and we just thank Jesus for that. I'm going to pray for the offering real quick, and then we're going to move on into our sermon. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. We ask that you would bless any offering that comes into your house, God, that you would do with it what you have done with it so far in the life of this church, and that you have multiplied it, and you have done amazing, miraculous things that we can't explain. We thank you so much, Jesus, for what you do. We love you, and we ask all of this in your holy name. Amen. All right, give me just 1 second. I'm going to introduce Scott. Scott, did they mic you up?
No.
No. Let's do that, too.
I can do a handheld.
Oh, there's a handheld up here. All right, cool. Come on up here. There's a hand up here. See what's in there. Check. There we go. It's kind of coming in, so, okay. We'll give this to you, Scott.
Brad, if you could use that one, apparently that one you have in your hand is cut out online. We can hear you in here, but we can't hear online.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, sure. Just a second. Okay. Well, that's a bummer. That's going to be like for a weird kind of online service. That's all right, though. People didn't even hear me tell them to come here. They just see me mouthing words. Somebody's got to be, hopefully somebody was in there transcribing into the Facebook comments. Okay. Well, guys, we're so pleased today and so honored to have Pastor Scott Reed with us here today as he starts a journey with us. And Scott's family as well. And I'm so bad with names, but it's Kendra, Lydia, Emma. And I only met your mom, though, today. So I can't, Ann? Paula. So I'm sorry. I have to say names like 3 or 4 times before I get them right. But so we're so honored. We're so happy to have you here starting this journey with us. And so I'm going to just give you a couple minutes to talk about yourself, and then you just go into the sermon. But we just, everybody, let's just give just a hand clap to God for what he's done and for bringing Pastor Scott here with us today.
Well, good morning. It's been awesome to meet all of you. My family and I have been really looking forward to this. Like you said, my wife Kendra is here with us, our 2 little girls, and then my mom just happens to be in for the weekend, so you really lucked out. You know, anytime it's your first day doing anything, it's always good to have your mom in the back row there watching you. Or maybe it's not. I don't know. It depends on the mom. But it is so good to be with all of you. This is kind of a weird deja vu experience for us this morning. In 2015, Kendra and I moved from Joplin, Missouri, up here to Monroe, Michigan. Kendra's actually from Britain, Michigan, if you know where that's at. I don't mean Brighton. I mean Britain. If you don't know where it is, it's past Cabela's. That's but Kendra grew up in Britain, and we came here in 2015 to serve at Monroe Christian Church, which is what this building used to be. And it's kind of, so I was thinking this morning about, so this stage is a little taller than it used to be. There's like an extra layer, and it comes out a little further. But it used to be right about there on the stage. It had this blue carpet that I'm sure looked great in the 80s. But there was a spot where the pulpit used to be. And so by the time we got there, the pulpit was sitting in the garage. It might still be out there for all I know. Is it still out there? No? Okay. Maybe somebody claimed it. I'd like to believe someone claimed it and it just didn't just end up in a bonfire or something, but who knows? There'd be no evidence. So, no, but the pulpit was gone by the time we got here. It was in storage. But you could see on this old carpet, this like 30-something-year-old carpet, that like there were 2 footprints there, just from so many years of somebody standing there at the pulpit, which I always was a little impressed. It's like, I can't stand still that long. I don't know who's, it's probably collectively a lot of people's footprints over time. But, that's a little bit how I feel this morning. As I look around here and just being in this building, it's like things are different, but it's also like exactly the same in a weird way, you know? It's like if you're from somewhere else and you go back and visit your hometown, or you go back and see your old high school or something like that, and it's like, it's different, but it's also like really familiar, you know, the smells and the look and feel of things. And it reminds me too just how much history there is in this building. Monroe Christian Church started in 1979, and when we came along, had a long, you know, through that what, 30-something years, 40, almost 40 years-ish, that we were here, that the church was here. God moved in a lot of ways, and that church had a lot of ups and downs of its own. You know, I remember one summer in particular, summer of 2017, we were just in a rough spot as a church. There's a lot of baggage and it's a long story, and I'd be happy to get into it some other time. But the church was just in a rough spot, and we were having some hard questions about what the future of the church was going to be. And I remember actually at the time hearing around that time that that church down the road in the skating rink called CrossWalk was looking for a pastor. And me and the leadership team, I remember us meeting. You know, that used to be kind of a little classroom, conference room back there. I remember us sitting there, and the idea being thrown out of like, you know, CrossWalk's looking for a pastor. What if we like merged with CrossWalk or something? And it never really panned out. Like, we didn't really have a great way to get in touch or anything, so nothing ever came of it. But that idea was thrown out, and it was talked about and prayed about. But you know, we were, you know, going through really questioning like what the future of the church was going to look like. And I was really depressed and really in a lot of despair, and just had no hope about it, and was really frustrated. And you know, it felt like, you know, God, I was pretty sure that you wanted us to come here. I'm pretty sure you brought us here. Why is this happening? Like, why does it feel like nothing works? Why does it feel like it's just one problem after another? And like, you know, and I have a lot of regrets about that time too. I don't want to make it sound like it was all just this terrible church, and here I am, you know, number one pastor coming into this crummy church. You know, like, no, I had my issues, you know, and there are a lot of situations I wish I'd handled a lot differently than I did. And but it was just this really, really depressing time. And I kind of finally came to terms with the fact that I can't control this, that I don't know why God's doing what he's doing, but I'm going to have to just let him do what he's going to do. And right now, I need to be faithful to what he's entrusted to me. And so that's what I tried to focus on. And then a couple weeks later, I got a Facebook message from this guy named Grant Agler, who is the pastor of LifeBridge Church up in Taylor. And there, you guys had a skating rink, they had a bowling alley. And so he wants to get lunch. We actually went to the same college, and he tells me they're actually looking at potentially starting a campus of LifeBridge Church in the Monroe area, and he's wanting to get to know some other pastors. And so we get lunch at Bob Evans up there on North Telegraph there, and you know, as he's sitting there, I'm thinking like, oh, he's gonna see, like, he wants to see if we want to like merge with them or something, and like, you know, partner with them or whatever. And that's what something about the way he was describing things and talking about his own story, I thought that's what he was leading up to. And I was like, okay, so what would it look like if, you know, Monroe Christian Church became the LifeBridge campus? And he was kind of taken aback by that, because that's not at all what he had in mind. But it led to an interesting conversation and a lot of other interesting conversations, and that ended up happening. So Monroe Christian Church ended up becoming the campus of LifeBridge Church here in Monroe, which was just awesome in a lot of ways. And we had our ups and downs, but it was cool to see God at work. And, you know, Kendra and I went through a process at that time where, you know, so it's like, well, now what? You know, there are churches all over the country, all over the church, all over the world. There's opportunities to do ministry. You know, I mean, I'm sure we could find a job at another church. Do we just pick up and move? And we did a short stint at a church a little ways off from here, and that's a whole other story. But like, we were at a point where we're just trying to discern, like, well, what's the wise thing to do here? Where's God leading us now? And we really felt like, you know, we lived here in Monroe for a few years. We're just starting to get to know people. You know, like, we're just starting to actually build relationships and get somewhere. And so we were like, I don't want to lose that. I don't want to have to start all over. Like, why don't, instead of like looking outside, why don't we just focus on, like, God is at work here. God is at work at LifeBridge. Like, I'm sure I'm employable. I could find a job. You know, I'll just find some secular job, and we'll just be involved at LifeBridge. And so I did. I've had a couple different secular jobs. These days I work at a bank. But, you know, but we're like we got to be involved in LifeBridge, and we got to see what God was doing. We got to see people being baptized. We got to see people growing in their faith. We got to see people taking on, like, serving and moving into leadership positions and finding God's calling for their life. And we just got to see some amazing fruit come from that. It was awesome to be a part of. And then, as a lot of you know, LifeBridge Church, what Monroe Christian Church did with LifeBridge Church then did with 242 Community Church, and LifeBridge Church became 242. And so we were still meeting in this building, and a lot changed, but a lot was the same too. And again, just seeing God at work, God moving, and God's doing really cool things with 242, and it's really exciting to watch. And now more recently, of course, we actually a little over a year ago, Kendra and I started serving at this church down in Toledo. The pastor there was a friend of mine, and he just moved down to Florida, and they were also in the middle of COVID, and they ended up selling their building. Sound a little familiar? And they're going through a lot of change, a lot of transitions all at once. And so the past year or so, we've been able to be involved down there and serve however we can there. But it's just, as I look back on all this, it's interesting because at various moments throughout this time, nothing has gone the way I wanted it to. Nothing has gone the way I expected it to. I've been multiple times disappointed and frustrated and lost hope. And again, when I look back, I see God doing things that I couldn't have done. I see God working in ways that I couldn't have predicted. And it's often those times where it feels like God is the most absent, where we can't see him at all, that he is moving the chess pieces behind the scene in a way that you don't see until it all comes together. And you're like, oh, when did that happen? Like, how did that work? That doesn't make any sense, but only God could have done that, right? And you see what God does through these times that he just feels totally absent. And it reminds me a lot of the text that I want to look at with you this morning. If you've got a Bible or a device and you want to pull that out, we're going to be looking at the book of Esther. And we're just going to kind of be going through the whole story this morning. It's just a short book in the Old Testament. But Esther is very unique in a lot of ways, but is very unique in one particular way. And I wonder if there's a Bible scholar in the room that could tell me one of the most unique things about Esther. Anybody? Yeah, where's Patrick? Yeah. Oh, he's got a baby. He can't be expected. Nothing can be asked of him. One of the things that's interesting about Esther, never mentions God's name one time. Never mentions God's name. Now, you Bible scholars in here know that there's like a lot of different names and terms used for God in the Old Testament, right? I mean, the main ones like Yahweh and Elohim, but you also have titles like El Shaddai. None of those are in Esther. It never mentions God at all. And yet, I bet if I didn't tell you that, and you read through it, and it was your first time reading it, and I told you that, you'd be surprised to hear it. Because it sure sounds like God is on the move there, at least for us looking back, reading it now. And so if you don't mind flipping up, or flipping out, if we can flip our Bibles or our devices to Esther, we're going to kind of pick up reading in chapter 3. But basically where we start off, so God called Abraham way back when in Genesis 12. God calls this guy named Abraham and says, I want to work through you. What I am going to do is I'm going to give you descendants. I'm going to give your descendants a land to live in, and I'm going to bless you and provide for you. But it's not just about you. I'm going to bless you so that through you I can bless the whole world. And God, throughout the Old Testament, we see God has this mission for Israel, that they are his chosen people. That's his descendants become this people group, this nation known as Israel. That God is saying, I'm going to use you for a purpose. I'm going to set you apart as my chosen people for a purpose, for a mission. And that mission is, like Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 5, that God is going to reconcile the world back to himself, and Israel is going to be God's agent, God's tool in doing that, right? And so that's how this starts, and then things get pretty ugly pretty fast. Actually, at one period of time, Israel just totally goes off the rails. They completely abandon God. They're worshiping fake gods made out of sticks and rocks, and it gets ugly. And what ends up happening is the Babylonian Empire rises up, and they do to Israel what they've done to a lot of other nations at this point, is they invade, they take over, everybody either is killed or dragged off to Babylon, or a small number of people are left behind to, work the land and produce crops and stuff. And that's it. And everybody else is either dead or carried off. And so we pick up in Esther a few generations after that, when the latest empire on the scene, the Persians, have come on and they've taken over the Babylonian Empire. Just like the Babylonian Empire took over all these places, now, beat up the Assyrians. Now you've got the Persians coming in, taking over the Babylonians. And later on, it's going to be the Greeks, and it's going to be the Romans. And you know history. You guys know it, right? I know nobody knows. It's okay. But so we find ourselves here in the Persian Empire in the city of Susa, the kind of the capital city, the citadel, like a fortress city, right? And this is the headquarters of this entire empire. And we find ourselves with the Persian king Xerxes. And Xerxes seems to be a fun guy to be around if you like to party, but not a guy that you really want running like at the helm of a massive empire. Because as we're going to see, he makes some pretty stupid choices. He gets drunk, does something stupid that he can't undo while he's drunk. And then whenever there's a problem, he just kind of like hands it off to somebody else and says, hey, somebody give me an idea. What should we do about this, right? So long story short, a lot of you I know their story. Xerxes basically gets rid of his wife because there's this drunk party and he wants to bring her in with all these drunk guys, and she's like, no, thank you. And he's like, okay, well, goodbye. And she's no longer the queen anymore. And so now he sobers up and he's looking for a queen, and someone gives him a bright idea. Let's do The Bachelor, except an even more sick and twisted version of it, where we're going to kidnap all these young women from their homes. We're going to take them from their families, put them into your massive harem where you have all your concubines, make them all live in your harem, give them a year of what the NIV translates as beauty treatments, whatever that means in ancient Babylon, ancient Persia, but a year of that, a year of a special diet, whatever that means, and basically to get them ready. And basically you take a different one every night, and if you like one, you invite her back the next night, and if once you find one that you really like, you can make her the queen. And so it's and their lives are ruined, and they'll either never get to go home, or if they get to go home in that culture, they're going to be considered damaged goods, and good luck, your life is ruined. You weren't the lucky one that got picked, and I'm not sure the one who gets picked as queen is really the lucky one anyway. But anyway, so that is where we meet Esther, who the book is named after. Esther has this problem. She's Jewish. She's an Israelite. And people don't take too kindly to Jews at this period of time, unlike every other period of time in history. It's just this period of time. So she keeps it a secret. Now, another interesting thing about Esther, small world, she's an orphan. Her parents died when she was very young, and she was raised by her cousin, this guy named Mordecai, who just happens to be an official in the king's palace. And she just happens to be one of the young ladies who has the fortune of being included in this weird version of The Bachelor. And so basically, long story short, she ends up the queen. It's kind of crazy. Didn't really see that coming, but now she's the queen. Welcome to royalty, right? And so a lot of events transpire, but here's what really gets things started. So Mordecai, Esther's cousin, he picks up on a plot. Anybody know the story? What does Mordecai find out? Anyone? Oh, this is an easier question. There's these two guards, royal guards, that are plotting to assassinate the king, right? Plotting to assassinate Xerxes. And Mordecai steps in and actually tells Esther, and Esther tells the king and says, hey, Mordecai found out about this, right? Gives him the credit. And the plot is put to an end. And wow, that's cool. Now, normally the king would go out of his way to reward somebody for this, but he doesn't. He loves to show his wealth. He loves to just throw money at people and say, hey, look how cool I am. Look how much money I have, right? He loves to do this kind of stuff. He doesn't do anything for Mordecai. But there is this guy named Haman who is kind of climbing the ranks. He's becoming buddies with the king, and the king likes him, and he's very manipulative and knows what to tell the king to get him to do what he wants. And so he's cozying up with the king and climbing the ranks, and he kind of becomes this right-hand guy. And the king starts expecting people to, whenever Haman comes in, show him honor, bow down to him, treat him basically like royalty. And Mordecai refuses to do that, probably partly because Haman's just a terrible guy, and Mordecai knows that, but also probably partly because Mordecai is faithful to his God, and he knows that there is a certain kind of honor that no human on earth deserves that is reserved for God, and so he's not going to bow down to a human being. So that's probably part of it too. Well, so here's the problem. When Mordecai won't honor Haman, then he gets ticked off. He's going to do something about this, right? He's got power now. He's got influence. So he's going to do something about this. It says in Esther chapter 3, verse 3, It said, in verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, that is, that he's Jewish, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Like, well, yeah, that makes sense. You don't like somebody, why waste a good killing on just one guy when you could commit genocide? That's what I always say. So, I'm sorry, genocide isn't really funny, I know. I'm aware of that. All right. But Haman has this plot. He knows how to manipulate the king. Basically, he gets the king to put out this law that basically says on this particular date, and by the way, he rolls dice to decide when to do it. On this particular date, not just that the military is going to go out and do this, but anybody in the entire empire, 127 provinces, everybody is authorized to kill any Jew they see. So, and you can plunder their goods. And there's no discrimination, like kill men and women, children, doesn't matter, old and young, doesn't matter. Kill whoever you want, right? It's like the Purge, but like very one-sided. It's like the Purge meets the Holocaust, So that's Haman's plan, and he gets the king to go along with it. It manipulates him, kind of embarrasses him into having to do it. It's subtle, but basically, so they sent out these dispatches, the couriers, the messengers that go throughout the whole empire and announce the news. It's kind of crazy, kind of a problem, right? So, basically you can kill on this particular day, you can kill any Jewish person you see. Maybe you just don't like them. Maybe they have stuff that you want. Maybe you just like killing people. I don't know. But you get a free pass for it. So naturally, when this is announced, the Jews all over the empire are kind of freaking out. And they're mourning, and they're crying, and they're praying, they're fasting. And Mordecai's doing the same, and they're doing it, publicly and visibly, as was normal in the culture at the time, and they're kind of freaking out. And I think, although I personally have never been the upcoming victim of a genocide, I think we can all relate to the feeling of despair, to the feeling of, God, I thought you were doing something here. I thought this was supposed to go differently than this. I thought you had made these promises, you had made these grand claims about what was going to happen, and now where is all that? This is not what was promised. This was not what we were told to expect. What is going to happen now? Like, what can we possibly do? Well, so Mordecai contacts Esther and says, hey, you need to do something about this, because guess what? You're the queen. This is good timing, because maybe you could convince the king to change his mind. Maybe you could do something about this. And she's like, oh, that's not happening. And there's some reasonable reasons for her to say that, too. For one thing, she says, like, well, there's kind of some high security standards here in the palace. Like, people don't just go up to the king. Like, you remember this assassination attempt. Like, that kind of stuff happened. You don't just go up and talk to the king. If you just walk in uninvited, you get killed, because you could be an assassin, even if you're part of his inner circle, right? And so just because she's queen doesn't mean she can just go in and talk to him anytime. He has to invite her to be in his presence. Here's the other thing she says. I may be the queen, but he hasn't invited me for over 30 days, right? Which, remember, he's got a whole harem full of concubines, so, like, he's got plenty of options. He likes her, but maybe he's getting bored with her, or maybe he doesn't like her as much anymore, or the new car smell is wearing off, right? Like, he might not want to see me, right? And so she's concerned about that. Here's the other thing. He doesn't know that she's Jewish. And people are not fond of Jews. If you read Esther, you see that pretty clearly, that they're facing a lot of that. She doesn't necessarily want to give that away. That's a risk to her own life. Now, it says in chapter 4, verse 12, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. And this is huge right here. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. This is not, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. This is, yeah, you're not our only hope. If you don't do this, God is fine. God's going to figure this out. God is going to find another way. God will figure this out. If he wants to figure this out, he'll do what he wants to do. And it'd be great if he could do this through you. I think that would be cool. But if God's going to do it, God's going to do it. And if he's not, he's not. And it doesn't really matter in that sense what you do, whether you want to be a part of this or not. But that being said, if you're worried about saving your own life here, don't think you're going to get out of this. Sooner or later, it's going to get leaked that you're Jewish too, and something's going to happen to you. But also, by the way, your entire family is about to be murdered. Your entire family. So, like, you make your choice, right? It's kind of brutal. It's kind of harsh, but this is kind of brutal circumstances, right? So he says very clearly, it might just be. In all this, you didn't choose any of this. You didn't choose to be queen. You didn't choose to live in a harem. You didn't choose to be ripped away from your family. You didn't choose for your parents to die when you were little. You didn't choose anything that's happened to you in your life. You've had no say in what your life was going to look like. But you know what? Through all that, what if God has actually been working through this to put you in just the right place at just the right time for this very purpose? Who knows? He could have been. And maybe it won't be you. Maybe God will do it another way. But you could be the way. You could be the way that this happens. Well, that's kind of a challenge. So Esther ends up doing it, but she says, first, before I do, I want, ask everybody, all the Jews in the city of Susa, everybody pray for me for 3 days. Let's all fast and pray day and night. I'm going to do it too. I'm going to have my servants do it. We're all going to pray and fast that this will go well. And so she gives it a try. She puts on her royal robes and her crown, and she goes to the entrance to the king's throne room. And she goes, and he sees her. And guess what? He's happy to see her. And so he extends his golden scepter to her, which is a sign she can approach, and she touches the tip of it, which is what you're supposed to do to show that you come in peace, you're good, you're not going to try to stab him or something, right? And he's like, hey, how you doing? It's good to see you. He's like, tell you what do you want? Anything you want in the whole world. I'll give you anything up to half my kingdom. Famous last words. I'll give you anything you want up to half my kingdom. And she says, all I want, I made a little banquet, little meal for us. Thought it'd be nice for us to have a little date night. So I would love for you to come and eat with me. And that's all. Oh, and bring Haman. Remember the guy who wants all the Jews killed? Because when your wife comes up and she wants to have a date night, and she's like, oh, also bring your right-hand man with you. It would be great to have a third wheel, But he accepts. They go to the banquet, the king and Haman do. And they have a good time, and they're drinking, and the king's like, hey, what's this really about? What do you really want? Come on, tell me. It's yours, whatever you want. She's like, all I want you to do is come back again tomorrow, and we'll do the same thing. And so they go, and Haman goes out, and he's feeling awesome. This dude is on top of the world right now. He's the number two guy in the kingdom. He, has the king's signet ring, which, gives him the king's authority to pass laws and stuff. Things are going well for Haman, except this Mordecai guy. Right? And so he goes home, and he gathers his friends and his wife, and he's like, man, he's boasting about how good his life is. He's like, dude, I am so awesome. I have it made right now. You know what? The only thing in my life that is incomplete? All those Jews still alive. If only we could do something about that, especially that Mordecai. And one of his friends is like, dude, perfect solution. There's a little plot near your house. Why don't you just put up a 75-foot pole and impale the guy? Why didn't I think of that? Of course, let's just set up a pole and impale the guy. Apparently, that's a normal enough thing. That's why don't you just set up a pole and impale him? You know what? Great idea. You just got promoted. We're going to do that. And so he gives orders. He has this pole set up 75 feet high, right? And he goes to the king right away. It's late at night, but he goes to the king right away to say, hey, I'm putting up this pole. I'd like to go ahead and skewer Mordecai, please. It's like, yeah, sure, buddy, whatever you want to do. So he goes to the king. Here's the thing. While this is happening, the king is in bed. And the king doesn't have Netflix back then, and he doesn't have a phone to look at. So what do you do when you're laying in bed and trying to fall asleep? What, you just lay there and try to fall asleep? No, he's the king, so he has people come in and read a bedtime story to him. And what's great is the bedtime stories he has are the history of the empire, and specifically him. So it's not just bedtime stories, it's propaganda about how awesome he is that has been recorded for posterity. I was about to say prosperity, that's the other word. For posterity, right? And so they're reading to him, and guess what? You remember when Mordecai saved the king's life? Remember that? The king didn't, but they read it, and he's like, oh, yeah. Hey, what did we ever do for that Mordecai guy? And the servants are like, nothing at all. You didn't do anything. He's like, man, well, that's not right. Let's fix that. Hey, who's in the court? Do I have any officials or anybody out there in the palace court that I could talk to and see what we can do here? And guess what? Haman just happened to walk in, and they're like, yeah, Haman's here. So picking up at chapter 6 here, he's like, yeah, bring Haman in. And it says in verse 6, when Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman has no way of knowing who the king's talking about, but he makes an assumption. Now Haman thought to himself, it says, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? Obviously. So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, right? You don't just want like a baseball jersey. You want a baseball jersey that somebody has worn, right? Like bring that the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested. For Mordecai the Jew, dun dun dun, who sits at the king's gate, do not neglect anything you have recommended. Oh, man. Oh, this is awkward. So Haman has to do it, right? He just basically spilled out his fantasy. And now he has to go and do that for the guy that he hates the most. He just literally was there to ask if he could impale this guy on a 75-foot pole. And instead now he has to lead him on a parade saying, the king loves this guy, favorite guy right here, right? Like, this is the best guy. And so he has to do this. And it's totally humiliating. And he goes back and he's talking to his wife and his friends again after the parade the next day. And his friends and his wife actually tell him, they're like, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. Like, ouch, thanks, guys. Real supportive. But there's a healthy respect. Like, if you know the story of the spies that go to Jericho, and Rahab says, like, everybody here is kind of freaking out because we heard what your God did to the Egyptians, and now you're coming our way. Like, there's kind of this healthy respect of, like, I don't like you, but I'm scared of your God, and what your God can do, because he always seems to do things to people that go against him, right? And so they're like, yeah, this is not going to go well. This is going to go real bad real quick. And so just as they're having that conversation, the servant's taken back for Esther's second banquet. And we have our big reveal moment, right? Let me just read it for you. We're picking up in chapter 7 here, starting in verse 3. Then so basically they are eating and drinking. They're drinking lots of wine. The king's like, okay, for real, Esther, what do you want? She says, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Not just one, all three. All right? Destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we'd merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Like, wow, she is very deferential here. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and enemy, this vile Haman. Dun, dun, dun. The big reveal, right? Then, naturally, Haman is kind of freaking out. And, so the king, like, storms off. He's angry. He's so angry, it says he leaves his wine. I know. He leaves his wine behind and storms off. That's how mad he is. And Haman is like, okay, this is it. So he's begging for his life with Esther. The king comes back in the room, right, as Haman is like, falling down on the couch that she's on, and it looks bad. It doesn't look quite what's happening, right? And the king's like, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? Like, wow, this is looking real bad. So I love what happens next. So then like, king's like, all right, we're taking care of this right now. What are we going to do? And this servant, who has not said a word, all the servants are quiet throughout this story, but all of a sudden one of them speaks up. He says, well, there is this brand new skewering pole that Haman just put up. And by the way, he put it up to impale Mordecai. The guy you threw a parade for yesterday? Like, that's convenient. Let's use that one. Good thing it's available. And so they go and they impale Haman on there, and wow. So that just happened. But that doesn't solve the problem of that all the Jews are going to be killed, because a law has been passed, and that's serious. And in this society, you can't just undo a law, because that makes the king look weak. So you can't just undo laws. So basically, long story short, the king gives Mordecai the signet ring, gives him the power, and he makes a law that basically says that Jews can defend themselves, and they do. They do, and actually God delivers them. And not only can they defend themselves, but they can actually plunder from the people they end up killing in the process in self-defense. And they defend themselves, but they don't take any plunder. It ends there. And everybody celebrates, and Mordecai says, hey, this is going to be a celebration for years to come. And if you know Purim or Purim, or however you want to pronounce it, they still celebrate that. Jews still celebrate that to this day. Celebrate what God did through Esther and through Mordecai. But I say all this to say, this whole story This is a story where God seems completely silent, completely absent. We never hear God speak. We never get a view into what he's thinking or feeling. We never even hear God mentioned. And yet, as I read this, like a couple thousand years later, looking back at this, I see God all over this. God is on the move. Now, I know that CrossWalk has been through a whole lot. I don't know the half of it, of what it has been like to be a part of this church through everything that you guys have been through. I can't imagine what that's like. I've had experiences of my own, but I don't know what it's like to be you. I don't know what you guys have been through, but I know it's been a lot. And I know you probably have stuff going on in your own life on top of that. You're having issues at work. You're having issues with your family. You're having health issues. You're having any number of issues. You're having financial issues, right? I don't know about you. I have personally been in a lot of scenarios where I have wondered where God was in all this. I've wondered if he was still going to do what he said he would do. I wondered if he was still with me. I wondered if he still cared. The lesson we learned from Esther is in God's silence might be when God is most present. In God's silence might be when God is most on the move. Now, I don't know why God has allowed what he has allowed to happen, but who knows? It might just be that God has put you in the specific situation you're in right now for a specific reason. It might be that God has something very specific that he wants to do through you, and if not through you, he'll do it another way. If not through you, he'll do it another way. But God might have just put you where you are for a reason. I don't know what that reason is, but I believe that God is moving here. Over the past few years, as Kendra and I have been a part of this community, I've been rooting for you guys. I've been praying for you guys. I've been invested in your story. I know a lot has happened. We've been through a lot, and being involved with 242. I've met some of you through different events in the community and stuff like that. Keith and I were on the leadership team together for a ministers group here in the Monroe area. I know there's been a lot. And I've been rooting for you guys and praying for you guys through all this. I want you to know, Kendra and I, our family, we're here for you. That's what we're here for, is just to help however we can. If you need somebody to talk to, we're here for you. If you need somebody to just understand, just that you can just explain what you're going through and not have a sermon preached at you or advice you didn't ask for, but just to have somebody hear you, we're here for you. Or if you want advice, we'll do our best. We're here for you there too. We want to be here to be a part of the healing process, to be a part of the moving forward process. And we want to really, really be listening to God and trusting him to lead us where he wants to lead us. And if God has put us here for a reason, I want to pray and I want to seek his will so that we can be on that path, that we can be used by him exactly the way he wants to use us. That's exactly what I pray for you guys. Let me pray real quick, and we'll close out our service this morning. Heavenly Father, God, I thank you for everybody who's in this room right now. I thank you for everybody who's watching or listening online. Lord God, I pray that whatever hurt and whatever pain is going on right now, the challenges that we're facing, God, I pray that you would reveal yourself in that. God, I pray that at the times where you seem silent and distant, I pray that you would reveal to us the way that you're working. Lord, I pray for everybody here. I pray for healing. I pray for direction and wisdom. I pray for growth and that we would know you more, Jesus. Lord, I pray that you would guide us, and if there is something that you are wanting to do through each of us, wherever we find ourselves, I pray that you would use us in that way, that we would be obedient, that you give us ears to hear your voice, to be obedient to your Spirit leading us, to seek your wisdom. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.